Hey, I'm Doug.
And I'm Theo.
And today, Theo is going to fix my damn hips.
Hips don't lie. So what we're talking about is a ball and socket joint. And really up to this point, everything we've talked about from the foot to the hip, it all works together. So, when you have a ball and socket joint, it's really important that that is moving correctly. And especially with rotation, we spend a lot of time working on stretching the front of the hip and getting the hip flexor to loosen up. And what we don't pay attention to is it rotating? Because if it's not rotating, you're not going to be able to get the arm over your head. You're not going to be able to get down into a nice, efficient squat. So we're going to address assessing it, so what normal should look like, how to go after it on your own, so using lacrosse balls and softballs, and then what do you do from there? So you address the tissue. Maybe it feels better after you work on it for a few minutes with a lacrosse ball, but then it comes back a couple days later. So, okay, well, maybe it's not a tightness then. Maybe we're actually addressing more of an instability, and that tightness is a secondary effect. We're gonna go through that, and then we'll show you how to load it in a couple stance positions. So single limb is always a good place to start. We don't put our bodies in positions in multi-direction planes enough, and those are typically when we end up seeing injuries. We'll use Doug and run through the setup. We'll go through the evaluation, the treatment, and in the order that I would address it, and then we'll get to have a little fun with them at the end. All right, guys, so we're talking about the hip. The idea behind a ball and socket joint, such as your shoulder and your hip, is it has to rotate before you can apply any kind of flexion or extension, especially under load. So with squatting, you're noticing that on the descent. Overhead positioning with the shoulder is typically where you'll see a dysfunctional pattern or pain. So you have to establish rotation first, and that's what we're gonna do quick here is just see what kind of rotation he has. So I'll show you what normal should look like and if he can get there, and then we'll go into some treatment options, okay? If I grabbed his right leg, he's completely relaxed, so I just wanna see if I can find anything that might be deeper into the joint, because if he's complaining of maybe a hip thing and it's only when he's activating a muscle, okay, maybe it's the muscle. I wanna see if there's something going on that's a little more serious. So I'm just toggling the hip. First I wanna see if he can drive that knee past the parallel point, sort of that 90-degree depth squat. And one, does he have it, or does anything start to change drastically? So is he lifting the back? Is he guarding? Is there a pinch? Is there a grab? So pretty good, you can get there. Next thing I wanna check is some rotation. So the leg is going out, but the hip joint is swiveling in. So that's internal rotation. Now what I want to see is, can he acquire about that 20 to 30 degrees? Pretty good. So he actually has good range there. And I'm not hitting anything that is concerning to me. I'm not hitting a hard clunk. He's not reporting anything sharp. So check 2, that's good. He's going to relax. We're going to go into external rotation. And this is actually a little stiff. So I'm already hitting some resistance here. So ideally, right about here is where I would want to see that leg swivel. And with Christian, with the knee video, if you notice, we just did a different option where I'm gonna let the leg drop toward the ground. And if I block that hip, you can see it there as well, okay? So just trying to see if he can acquire that rotation in the hip to allow him to get into some more flexion and extension, such as a squat, a deadlift, okay? This is a limitation. If he has pain, I'm gonna try to figure that out. If it's just more of a stretch back here, good. We're gonna move to the next spot. But what I'd want to do is check both sides and see if there's something maybe off. Because if this side moves a lot more, if this one moves a lot less, there could be some compensation patterns going on. So I'm just gonna check real quick. So this one looks okay. Run through. He's got good equal rotation there. And then this one's equally as stiff, okay? Relatively common with guys, we're a little stiffer in the hip rotation region. One thing you could do immediately though is if you feel like you maybe you're a little off, if you squat and you notice you put more weight on one side, the quick shotgun technique where you take a basketball. So I'm gonna use my arm in this case. So if he relaxes, I'm gonna get right here between his legs and he's gonna squeeze. So he's gonna be a big squeeze, as hard as he can. Good, and relax. And we'll do the same thing, but now he's gonna start from a much closer position, so he's gonna squeeze. Good. He's doing all right, and then he's gonna pull apart. He's gonna do the same thing, just kind of pull.
Oh, there was
Good.
something.
And relax. Got it. We'll go have a cigarette, and we'll be right back. So that's a quick, easy way to at least just start getting the hip maybe into a position where it was a little offset. Not that you need to do that, but if those are things you commonly notice, try that out. Okay, so we know we've got a restriction with the hip rotators. So a lot of the rotators are out here. He probably was feeling that stretch. I didn't ask him, but he was feeling the stretch out there. So we're gonna target those tissues and just see maybe if they're guarding, maybe if it's just a pattern where it's not tight, it's guarding, it's a little weak. And as we go through this process, we'll tease that out. So he didn't have anything in the hip that was concerning to me. He wasn't getting any deep groin pain. He's not coming into the clinic asking me like, why does his leg go numb with sharp hip pain in the groin? Because that's actually the hip joint. A lot of muscles attach out here, but if you ever have that sharp pain here, especially if you notice it with impact, like those are things you want to have checked out. All right, so you guys should know what this is. It's a lacrosse ball. With this first technique, you can use either a lacrosse ball or a softball. Don't use a tennis ball, don't use a golf ball. You want to have some surface area because the area that you're hitting, it can feel very painful, like more than it should with the smaller the ball. The first one we'll show is just a lacrosse ball. The second one I'll show you, definitely try to use something a little larger like a softball, okay? So we're going to the side of the hip, and if you find that bone, there's a bone like right on the side of your hip here, there's where a lot of your rotators attach. So we're working just above that and higher up towards the hip crest itself. So all he's gonna do is he's gonna line that ball up, and then he's gonna shift his weight toward me, so that way he can, it's out of the other way, so he's gonna shift toward me, so he's piling himself on top of the ball. And he's just gonna dig around, he's gonna search in that side right above the pocket area, and he's gonna find some areas that don't feel great. And once he finds that spot, he can pin that, he can take some deep breaths. This area is very, very common to send almost like a radiating ache or numb down the leg. It's not the nerve, it's actually those side muscles that they're destroyed with a lot of the training that we do. So this can help quite a bit. Just make sure, you're not going too fast. Breathe the whole time, don't hold your breath. Make sure those tissues are getting oxygen. You should be finding areas that are very uncomfortable and you're targeting that. This isn't social media update time. Like, this is focused, very, very direct work. A lot of us who don't even realize how abused these muscles are until you start treating it a little bit with the lacrosse ball or a softball. That's because they're deep. So a lot of these muscles are deep. They're layered. You can take your hand and dig in there. You're not going to find it. One of the common finds I'll see with if somebody's rucking a lot, if they're running, if their volume's going up, and that leg starts to feel numb, not necessarily during a run, but maybe later in the day. This is a really good, easy kind of self-correct and see, does that reproduce it? And if it does, then there's homework. Try to reduce the tension in that muscle. But the bigger issue is, okay, well, why is it going numb? Why is that trigger point there? We need to release that. All right, so that's the first technique. This one, he's gonna sit up. And I know a lot of people probably think they do this on their own, they know how to do this one, but this is different. So we're going for the piriformis, and the piriformis is this tiny muscle that attaches from that lateral hip bone we talked about, and it runs all the way up to your lower back. Typically, you'll just take a foam roller across that leg, kind of roll back and forth. You hold a conversation with somebody. Again, this is not the time to social media, like Facebook, whatever, man. This is dial it in. Find your breath, work on these spots, get in and get out. So he's gonna place this ball, and we're gonna use a lacrosse ball, but ideally softball works better. So that lateral hip bone, he's gonna go right behind it. He's gonna put the weight on forearms. Make sure you go on your forearms. He's gonna cross his leg, line my body on top of that ball, and then once I find a spot that feels good, I'm gonna take my knee and just slowly pull toward my shoulder and just rep back and forth. So notice I'm not making any kind of pain face. So we'll compare that to Doug's in a minute here. It sucks, okay, but in a good way. This is the kind of stuff we need to be addressing if we're ramping up the training, okay?
Oh, Jesus.
Exhale.
There it is.
So it's pretty miserable. You gotta dig into.
It actually feels okay. It's just a lot.
Yeah.
That's what she said. Not to me.
You're not gonna apply as much pressure when you're up on your arm, so you really try to have to just drop your weight in using the forearm. And then because it's below a lot of these large, thicker muscles in the boot region, you gotta put some pressure into it. So you gotta dig through those. So that's why if he can pin it with the ball and then mobilize over top of it, he's stabilizing one end and then forcing it to stretch. Okay, so we released some of the tissue he had that were restricted on the back part of the hip, backside part. The second part is gonna be mobilizing those tissues with a little twist. So we're trying to get the hip joint to gap just enough to clear even more space. So if you have a jump band, anything like this will work great. Just make sure you anchor it to something stable. If you're anchoring this just to a dumbbell, it's not gonna work. You wanna make sure the weight, because these bands by themselves create a lot of force. So he's gonna be moving through a couple stretches. And as he's moving, I wanna make sure he's not feeling anything in the knee, he's not feeling anything in the back, he's not sacrificing the spine. So we're trying to address the hip, but the hip helps to feed the back and the knee and the foot and the ankle. So he's gonna step through this band. He's gonna put his foot up on a stable box. This goes pretty high up, so he's gonna set that up himself. He's not gonna pinch anything. He's gonna get it nice and high into the hip. And if I just pull out to the side, he can lunge forward, back and forth. As long as the knee's tracking over the toe, he's looking good. He's not feeling any kind of a pinch, anything sharp, anything radiating down the leg. He's keeping a nice stiff midsection. So he could do 5 or 10 reps. This is one that often is pretty stiff if you're, again, like rucking, running. If you notice your feet, if you walk and your feet are just turned out all the time, like that's not ideal. This is an area that you might need to address before you start squatting, lunging. Good. So that just clears a little bit of space. The main show is going to be this back from the lateral, like posterior position. So this is where I'm going to apply a good bit of pressure because I want to open up that tissue in the hip. So if you look at his knee, it kind of mimics the bottom of a squat. So a lot of us lose the stability in our spine at the bottom of a squat. We actually create that butt wink, and it's because we're missing posterior capsule movement in the hip. So if I load up on this is trust here because I'm going to try not to let this go. But I'm going to hold this here. He's going to keep his foot from rolling to the side. He's going to keep everything weighted symmetrically through the foot. He's just going to rock back and forth. It's good. So chest up, rock back and forth. We'll assess that, make sure nothing sketchy, sharp pain, anything down the leg. He's looking good. His spine's looking good. So he's going to sink into that position, and now he's going to rotate his upper body to the left. And what you should start to feel is a nice deep stretch down through the hip.
Oh, I'm feeling it.
And he can push the right elbow into the right knee a little and get that hip to open up just a little bit more. So he can hang out here. He can rep it back and forth. Typically 30 seconds to a minute, because 30 seconds is where the tissue starts to give and actually loosens up. So really a minute is ideal. He can rotate his upper body to the left more, just kind of go back and forth, left and then back to midline, left, midline, left, midline. So we'll come out of it nice and slow, nice and controlled. And then if he just retests, even if he likes to squat like this, that would be a concern if somebody's always squatting like that. But even if he puts his feet with just a little bit of an outward flare and he retests that squat, there should be a difference. He should feel like he can just sink right into that right hip, capture. Now he's actually loading this and not putting his back into a position where somebody that comes in with an overcooked back, and it's because their hip is the issue, okay?
My right side feels completely different than my left side.
Yeah, and that's what you should feel. It should feel almost kind of like a Bambi type hip. So what I would do is I would have somebody warm up with that instead of going into like an aggressive, haphazard, dynamic warm up where they're so stiff in their hip, they're not even able to pull their leg up the correct way. They're way out here, and then they're just twisting on the knee. So you're gonna get way more out of that because you're actually addressing the joint as well as any kind of soft tissue. Now the last thing we're gonna do is just load that leg, because we know single limb activation is really important. We can build strength in this little box, but life is not this little box. There's a lot of stuff that can happen in different directions. So we want to make sure that what he's feeling here, he can actually capture that, control it, own it, and then apply it. Because multi-directional athletes need to be able to move all over. Okay, so we created some space. The muscles know that they're loosened up. They're still trying to figure out what to do with that new range of motion. So we're going to load that new range of motion, but we're going to do it in a safe way instead of just having him kind of bang out like 100 single leg pistol squats or something. If he stands on that right leg, he's going to reach forward and tap, and then reach back and tap. And this one should feel pretty easy. He's just moving back and forth. If he wants to make it a little more challenging, he can take his arms over his head, and as he reaches forward, he reaches behind him, and all of a sudden it's a little bit harder to control your pelvis, and then he's going to reach back, same thing. It's back and forth. So he would do about 3 reps on each side if he was warming up. So he's getting this plane, like very linear, like a lot of us move well here. What we don't move well with is side to side and when we add rotation. So for the next one, he's gonna start, he can keep his arms out in front, but he's gonna reach to the left and tap, and then he's gonna reach, cross over and reach to the right. And now he's just loading his body in this plane, And if somebody is comfortable in this plane, this would look really easy. But for most of us, it's actually pretty tough, so don't laugh.
Yeah, if it's easy.
Good, so you can bend the knee though, so you can let the knee bend a little bit. And then we're gonna make it fun for you guys. So he's gonna take his arms overhead. So he's gonna reach behind him as he reaches to the side, and then reach behind him as he reaches. Yep. I wanna see is as he reaches that way, like what happens to that right knee? Is it just collapsing, or is he able to keep that nice and controlled? Good, so he'd do about 3. And then for the last one, he's gonna hit rotation. So he can start again with the arms in front. He can even spread it out a little if he needs to get more support. But he's gonna reach and tap. Ooh, almost held it, and then bring it back. And he's gonna go all the way across his body. So he's gonna go further that way than he's gonna go when he comes back to the right. But I wanna see how much does that knee move. It's okay, he's unweighted, so it's okay if he's actually letting the knee collapse a little bit. But what I wanna see is if we created more of a stability exercise where he's actually reaching and tapping without letting everything fall forward. I wanna progress to that and see if he can control his body in rotation, and then add some arm movements where he's able to control with the arms overhead, reaching backwards, because that's what happens in life. You don't have these premeditated positions where you know what's coming. You're able to just stay in that little box. Like if your arms are over reaching for a ball and you get bumped, that's a real life situation, okay? So more of like an injury prevention, injury reduction type drill, but still pretty critical if you're talking about just an everyday athlete.
Particularly important for tactical athletes.
Absolutely.
Like in a house.
First responders, anything where you're running on uneven ground and your body's just being thrown in different directions. Expect to have some weird stares if you want to self-assess. If you want to do it in the privacy of your own home, sure. But if you want to make it fun for us and maybe social media, go ahead and do it in the gym and see how people look at you. So the last one I like to do is get into a split stance position, sort of like a lunge, but he's going to turn both of his feet in. So I'm going to create some stretching through the glute, but I'm actually getting that internal rotation. So it's more of a stretch reflex, but in this position, he can put his arms up overhead. He can wiggle side to side. He'll feel some stretching in the front of the hip. He can reach forward, get trunk rotation forward, and then he can reach behind him, back and forth. And that front pocket, when your leg is behind you and the foot is turned in, that's actually a very normal position that should be happening when we're running. So a lot of the back pain we'll see from running, it's typically because that front hip muscle is a little jammed up. So if you look at your stance and you're somebody that walks like this, that's probably going to turn into a box jump. It's going to turn into running. It's going to turn into squatting. So you're biasing this unnatural open hip position. So you're tightening and jamming things up here, and you're creating sort of an imbalance in the front of the hip. Check the big red flags. Make sure, again, you're not getting any like the weird sketchy stuff, deep sharp pain. A little bit of that radiating ache is okay if you're hitting the lacrosse ball out here, but at no point should you be feeling like your foot is dropping, like you're losing motor control or strength. That sharp pinch, deep ache in the groin is always a tell for me because that's where the hip joint is. A lot of this stuff helps, but it doesn't mean that you still can't contact a physio if you have an issue. Give it about a week. If you notice it is helping, if it is improving, stick with it. If you notice you hit a wall or maybe there's something else going on you can't break through, feel free to hit me at tbphysio.com for more information.
If hypothetically it does make a difference and I start to see a huge improvement, which by the way, my right side feels completely different from my left side right now, and I'm also like sweating and a little tired from this. It was an unpleasant experience. If it is working, do I do this forever? Or am I going to find myself at a place where like I suddenly don't have to do these movements as much when I'm going into those like training sessions?
Yeah, so you start by doing this as often as you're squatting, as you're lunging. If you notice there's a deficit where maybe you are bottoming out and you're not able to actually maintain that spinal stabilization and you're doing the butt wink, you continue this until you stop noticing as much of that stretch, and then maybe you just do it once or twice a week. But these are integrity movements. It's I'm not having cavities anymore at the dentist, so I'm just going to stop brushing my teeth. No, like you have to maintain some of this. That integrity is what we lose because we stay in the mid-range. We don't go to those end-range positions enough. And when we do, it's typically underweight or before we end up having an injury that we didn't realize we were missing that range.
Stay tuned for next week when I go to Mexico and have all my teeth knocked out and replaced with wooden teeth that I don't have to brush anymore. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more content like this, click subscribe and ring the bell. And if you guys tried any of these corrective movements at home and you feel like they made a difference, Leave a comment below and let us know how it felt.